and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and we're back with another innovator interview. We're talking with Jeremy Schewe, who is the Chief Science Officer and co-founder of Ecobot, which is a company that develops software that helps wetlands experts record exactly what they're looking at for regulatory filings and other purposes, formal and legal purposes. Jeremy, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well. Now, you're calling in from Asheville, North Carolina, where Ecobot is headquartered. Before we talk about your app, let's talk about wetlands generally and what they are. You know, we have about 110 million acres of wetlands in the United States, but I don't think a lot of people understand exactly what that means. When we talk about a wetland, what kinds of land are we talking about?
That's a great question, Mitch. And I think sometimes it's a question that a lot of people skip over their understanding of the relationship of some of our natural systems. You know, most people think of a wetland and they think of these, nice grassy saltwater marshes or estuary areas along the coast, when the vast majority of our wetlands are located in forests and in headwaters areas all over the country. Wetland can be a very small, localized seep, something where there's water slowly oozing out between layers of geology and then, becoming a part of a forest floor or part of an open emergent wetland, or emergent meaning herbaceous species. And so there are vast numbers of wetlands, not only in the United States, but across the entire planet, that fit into so many different types of categories. Bogs are wetlands, fens are wetlands, estuaries are wetlands. There are entire vast sweeps of forests that are wetlands that oftentimes are only seasonally wet, but wet enough that they still perform the same function that any wetland would anywhere else on the planet.
Well, let's talk about that function, because there's both the natural processes that they support, which don't happen anywhere else. And then there's what we would refer to as environmental services, stuff that nature does for humanity that has a value. What's the value of the environmental services of wetlands, and what else does it do for the planet that we need it to do?
Well, so, there's a few studies that have come out over the last 10 years that show that globally, the value of wetland services is close to being around 14 to 15 trillion US dollars, which is pretty big impact when you think about it. Now, in the United States alone, there have not been very many comprehensive studies that have really been able to show what the collective value, when we think of in terms of services here in the United States alone, specifically in the continental United States. But a couple of studies have shown that, just in terms of the wetland mitigation industry, and that's where basically we are putting areas that maybe historically were wetlands and are now farmed, converting those back into wetlands, that the value of those alone in the United States is just shy of $3 billion. So like $2.8 billion. And then when we look at fishing licenses and hunting licenses and the economics behind renting land for hunting, we're looking at another $2.2 to $2.3 billion just in that alone. And then, thinking in terms of services, like we're going to come back to the services in a moment, but I still want to throw out another number that's just another wow number. Every time we have a major storm event in the United States that involves federal funding that needs to come in, those storms typically are costing on average, about $2 billion a piece. Mm-hmm. And when you think of that in comparison to the other numbers that we've just thrown out, there's almost an equanimity there. And to me, that really stands out as being a crucial number to look at, because one of the biggest services from a climate change, or for those out there who, when you say climate change, their ears turn red. Let's just say, when you're thinking about things in terms of how something is going to buffer potential impacts from storms, that's a lot of money. And a lot of what wetlands do, especially in coastal areas and in upper parts of watersheds, is they help to buffer the impact of the amount of force, velocity that is hitting both our natural systems as well as our human-made systems. So I think that that's probably the most important thing to call out there is just the areas that have, especially in coastal areas that are getting hit by hurricanes, where wetlands are intact, they really serve to buffer the velocity of a storm, and so play a tremendous role just in that dispersion of energy. But on top of that, wetlands play a crucial role in filtering out water. They play a crucial role in filtering out nutrients and sediments. They play a critical role in supporting some of the most biodiverse centers on the planet. I mean, from one perspective, 20% of our threatened and endangered species on the planet at some point have some portion of their life cycle tied into wetlands. And fisheries are tied to wetlands. I mean,
Sure.
the entire shrimp industry is tied to wetlands. And we can go on and on, fishing and hunting and just the aesthetic beauty that wetlands can provide. But these are some of the top level. But I think, it's easiest to put it into numbers when we can put it back into the human interface.
Mhm.
And so probably the most important thing to think about here is the buffering of the storms and the filtering of our drinking water.
Now, we recently learned through research that U.S. flood mapping is very poorly performed, or has been, and it turned out about 50% more homes were at risk of flooding. Do we have a good sense of the totality of wetlands in the United States, or are we also facing a failure of mapping?
In the sense, are you asking in the sense of what the impact, the loss of wetlands may have been historically?
No, more in the sense of, do we actually know about all of them? Have we really recorded our natural environment accurately?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I am a member of an international organization called the Society for Wetland Scientists. And, we have multiple conferences throughout the year with peer-reviewed presentations, et cetera, that really help to bring people to a cutting edge of where things are in the current moment. And, in my position with Ecobot and working with a lot of management in respect to data tied to what is available in terms of wetlands data for geospatially depicting models or having an understanding of what's changing, there are a handful of tools that are available that have some degree of accuracy. And one of the strongest tools that we have in the United States it's called the National Wetlands Inventory, and that is published by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And this is a database that's accessible to anyone in the public that they can go in and look at any amount of area. It could be as small as your backyard. It could be as large as nationwide, looking at where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service knows that there are wetlands. And then I'm going to pause there and then piggyback off of that. Now, there's also the U.S. EPA is also heavily involved in a wetland assessment for the entire nation. It's called the National Wetland Condition Assessment Project, and that was started in 2011, continued in 2016, and now will continue in 2021. So you can see the 5-year pattern there. And what that project is intended to do is to use a randomized geospatial model to determine where wetlands are known to exist or could possibly exist or should exist.
Mm-hmm.
And then states are then allocated funding to help with sending teams out in the field to actually first determine whether those sites are wetlands, and then to later return and collect a very robust data set for those specific wetlands. So let's
So,
pause there.
yeah, so now your app, Ecobot, is used by professionals to help them inventory these wetlands and identify what's going on there. So tell us
Correct.
how it's used and what are the trends that you're seeing in wetlands discovery and protection?
Sure. So, having been working in this industry for the last 17 years, what I saw was that there was a huge gap in the transfer of data into a digital format that would allow not only for more efficiency for the field worker, but also for management, but also the possibility of being able to look at how that data can influence our understanding of wetlands in a deeper way and potentially influence policy. So specifically how it works is the app is something that someone has on their phone or on a tablet. They take it into the field, and it's a part of the regulatory process, a part of the Clean Water Act. Basically, within the Clean Water Act, anytime there's going to be any potential temporary or permanent impact to a water of the United States, so that could be a stream or a wetland in various different forms,
Right.
that a scientist needs to collect 3 specific criteria data for a particular sample point to determine whether it meets the wetland criteria according to the Army Corps of Engineers, who assume the regulation of the Clean Water Act in terms of any potential impacts. That said, those 3 criteria are the hydrology, the vegetation, and the soils. And so for a site to be considered a wetland by and jurisdictional by the Army Corps of Engineers or by a state, it has to have specific indicators for all 3 of those criteria. And so the app is essentially allowing the scientists to collect their data much more efficiently and quickly, and then be able to, if they have a data connection in the field, send that data immediately up to a cloud-based silo, which then allows a JS team to be able to project that data into a geospatial map or model, which then, of course, allows for a better understanding of what is going on the ground.
Now, so it sounds like understanding our wetlands is still very much a work in progress and something that is probably in its early days, the same way that we're only beginning to track a lot of other aspects of the planet using satellites and digital technology. This is just the beginning of a greater understanding of the environment. As people use tools like yours to fill in all these blanks in our map of our understanding of the world, do you see changes in regulatory policy already under discussion that are going to transform the way we think about wetlands and maybe even allow people to monetize and make money from the fact they protect them, to the point we were talking about earlier about the immense value that these things have that are currently basically unrecognized?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's multi-layered. So I think I'll kind of tease it apart as I will, and if you want to redirect me, feel free. I think one of the key components that really comes out is there is already a very robust mitigation industry in this country as it is, and so for those of you who are listening and maybe you might have an understanding of like carbon mitigation, wetland or stream mitigation is very similar in the sense that we're assuming that someone is making an impact in one place. There's certain regulations in place that reallocate in lieu fees in order to put another area into some sort of conservation. And in most cases with mitigation banking, what they're doing is, again, restoring something to a pre-farmed condition. So bringing wetlands back to where they may have been at one point or another. And so it's a fairly robust business that a lot of different organizations are heavily invested in. In terms of policy changes, with our current administration, we have seen actually a reduction, a major reduction in the protection of our waters in the United States, and what is actually defined as waters of the United States has been reduced. And I think it's part of kind of a pendulum swing, because during our previous administration, we saw what a lot of people thought was kind of we won't call it a land grab, let's call it a water grab. And a lot of people believe that the feds were taking jurisdiction over waters that they didn't have the right to be. And so now we're looking at the pendulum swinging in the other direction, which is kind of opened up a big can of worms. And it was supposed to bring more clarity to what were considered waters of the United States. And I think it is, more than anything, just caused mayhem in another direction. And we're going to see a lot of legal cases in the coming years. And hopefully once we've changed the current administration seat out, we'll be able to kind of find a more equitable balance of what makes sense, because a lot of states have very poor wetland and stream protection programs.
Right.
Some states even have laws in place that basically say that that state cannot legally have higher regulatory rules than what the federal government has in place, which of course a lot of those states are going to be the Midwestern states, or the further Midwestern states. A lot of the upper Midwestern states have fairly robust state systems in place for protecting waters. So I think what we're going to see is multifold, Mitch. I think we're going to see that as more data becomes available, in the realm of natural resources, but specifically in respect to water, is that there'll be a greater understanding of what is out there and available. A lot of times when I'm giving a presentation or a talk or a webinar, I talk about the importance of being able to ascend biological data, or even abiological data, into the digital format. I'm kind of reminded of late 80s when they were turning everything from analog into digital, and the excitement around that. But the importance right now of policy is data driven. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have enough data available to help policymakers have a better understanding of what's actually out there, then we're missing out. And so I really feel like it's our responsibility as scientists, and for those of us in geospatial and data science, the critical role that we are going to play in helping to shape policy for the future.
So it sounds like there's a possibility that in the future we could articulate a value of a wetland and say it's worth preserving, and there may be even payments to the entity that preserves it. That's a reach, I understand. But let me go back to something else that you raised, and that's the very challenged political environment we're in. Are you optimistic that there can be a bipartisan conversation, let alone an agreement about wetlands protection in this country?
I tend to be one of these thriving optimists. I wouldn't say I'm an over optimist by any means. I still have a lot of faith in humanity that we can get past the contrived differences that are really being driven between the American people right now.
Do people you talk to on both sides of the discussion understand the value of wetlands, or at least understand what we don't understand about it?
Yeah, so most people that I'm working with, as scientists, like, we're really trained to look at what's there and not to, it's like, what can we record objectively? There's not a lot of subjective material involved with it. So, if I'm involved in a project that maybe I don't necessarily like the outcome of where the project is going to be. I mean, Data is data. Like, observations are observations. What we see in the field is what we see in the field, and that's what it is. I think that, to get back to the heart of your question in respect to thinking about whether we can make bipartisan decisions, I mean, to me, that, it's kind of that is loaded, because there's so much at stake when people are thinking about things. Decisions are frequently made, especially during voting time, based around whether somebody could get reelected. And so bipartisan? Can we get there? I believe that with the right timing around things, that just as with anything, that humans have the capability of figuring out how to bridge differences when they recognize the importance of something. And sometimes it takes looking at the bottom line of something to be able to really see that. When we can start putting numbers on things, 15 trillion worldwide,
Right.
just in the 3 different segments of the economic side of wetlands in the United States, we're already looking at over $6 billion just from those 3 metrics. When we think about the buffering effect from storms, I believe that we can find a way to find a balance in this pendulum swing.
So what policies do you think we should be discussing if we're going to pull together and bring our climate change response into line with Paris and other goals, and particularly with regard to wetlands, because they are a carbon sink, they are key to buffering these extreme weather events and a variety of other benefits that they provide, from wildlife and access to natural solutions to problems, the biomimicry we could learn from studying the wetlands. What are the key policies you'd like us to begin discussing?
I think that first and foremost internally is, I believe that the recent revamp of the Navigable Waters Rule under the Clean Water Act, and what the Army Corps of Engineers is actually holding what they assume in terms of holding for regulation. I believe that the idea for it in some ways came from the right place, but I think that, again, it's a giant pendulum swing away from what matters. So to me, the next few years, again, it might be 4 years, but I'm assuming that we're going to have a seat change and that we'll have an opportunity to find a better balance in how waters of the United States are held in respect to being, whether they're going to be jurisdictional or not. I feel like as a nation that is probably going to be one of the most important next steps. I think that in the perspective of the global theater, I think just as I have faith in humanity here in our own nation, I believe it's a really powerful time to remember that we are a part of a global civilization, and that, yes, we do have our own sovereign nations that we all hail from and to, but pollutants, dispersion of waste, like the transfer of energy, does not pay attention to boundaries. Political boundaries are completely fabricated, and the most important thing that we can be working on is rebuilding our relationships in the international theater, and being able to make more bold statements to make up for a lot of the damage that has been done politically, and at least on the policy side of the United States relationship with the rest of the world.
Well, Jeremy, that sounds like a great place to end today, but we'd love to have you back and talk more about this as things continue to develop. Thanks very much for joining us.
You betcha, Mitch. Take care.
Well, that was Jeremy Schewe, who's Chief Science Officer and co-founder of Ecobot. You can find out about Ecobot at ecobotapp.com on the internet. You may have heard of that, the internet. And check him out at Ecobot app and learn more about what he's doing. Thanks, everybody, for listening in today on Earth 911, Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. We'll be back with another innovator interview soon. Take care and be safe out there.